Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third and final session of this public speaking course. My name is John Dove, and I am the founder of publicspeakingtuition.com. So tonight's session is the final in this three-part series. And tonight I'll be looking at techniques for effective public speaking. So I've entitled this session, How to Make Your Speech Flow. And we've had two sessions so far. If you'd like to watch those sessions back, they are live on the YouTube channel now. So I'm going to begin tonight by looking at voice control. So when it comes to public speaking, the voice is our tool, and that is the thing that we need to control throughout the presentation. And one of the most important ways that I see that we can do this is when it comes to a presentation itself. Normally we'd be standing up. And what I would say is try and stand up as straight as you can, shoulders back, because this allows the airflow to flow a lot better throughout the body. And if the airflow is a lot better, it's easier to get your words out. I was actually asked the question by somebody who said to me, why is it that when I do public speaking, I quite often get lost for words and I'm tripping over the words due to that nature? And I say normally it's because you might be slouched, you might have the wrong body posture. So make sure that you stand up straight, shoulders back, and it just helps the airflow. The second point I'm going to make in relation to voice control is to look at the audience. Now, I know that I've mentioned this in every single session so far, and for different reasons. So, for example, when I was talking about improving confidence, the reason I mentioned to look at the audience is because it shows that you're a confident speaker and gives you that air of authority. When it came to building rapport with the audience, you're making eye contact and it helps you sort of build that rapport and make it seem almost like a conversation with the audience. But the reason it's important tonight in terms of a technique for voice control is because it means that when you're looking at the audience, you're looking up, your mouth is up, and you'll project your voice a lot better. If you're looking down at notes and you're talking down like this, you're talking to the paper and the voice doesn't project. So that's why it's absolutely crucial to make sure that you're looking at your audience and that your voice carries when you're delivering any presentation. And the last point, and I've made this point before, but it's important for voice control, is to catch your breath before giving a presentation. It might be the case that you've had to walk maybe 100 yards to get to the lectern. If you've had to walk from the back of a lecture theatre or something, you might have had to walk some steps. So you might have lost your breath slightly. So just take a second to gather your thoughts, and most importantly, gather your breath before jumping into the presentation. The last thing you'd want is to have to have walked a few steps, you're a little out of breath and jumping into the presentation too quickly. So just take that time to take a breath or two, have a sip of water, and then go on from there. The next point I'm going to look at now in relation to voice control is speed. This is one of the most important ways and one of the best ways that you can control your voice. Now, a lot of us, when it comes to everyday conversations, speak quite quickly. It just happens. We sometimes shorten words, we use colloquialisms, whatever it might be. But in day-to-day conversation, a lot of people talk quickly, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the way that we converse. However, when it comes to public speaking and presentations, normally we're looking to convey a message. We're looking to convince somebody of something, communicate in whatever way it might be, but we need the audience to take in what we're saying. And the best way we can do that is by speaking slowly, speaking at a pace that the audience can follow what we're saying. I know that a lot of us here tonight are lawyers, either law students or practicing lawyers. So you might be talking to moot judges or judges in court, and quite often they'll be writing down notes as you're talking. And if they're taking notes and you're talking too fast, they'll miss points. So that's why it's absolutely crucial to speak at a speed that your audience can follow. But it's not just important for lawyers, it's important for any form of presentation, speaking at a pace that the audience can properly appreciate your message. So as a general rule, I would say around 100 to 120 words per minute is about the appropriate pace. If it sounds a little too slow in your head, you're probably about right. So think about it like this. If you were to give a 10-minute presentation, you'd be aiming for about 1,000 words when it came to drafting the presentation itself. Now, of course, this isn't a hard and fast rule. It's not a case that you have to speak slowly all the time throughout every presentation. There can be times that you vary the pace of your voice. Now, where this could be important is if you were emphasizing a certain point, you could speak slower at that point to really add emphasis. Sometimes you might be talking about something you're quite enthusiastic about, and you can increase the pace at that stage. Or it could be that you're describing something that requires you to talk a bit faster. You could be explaining, to take an extreme example, you might be talking about blades on a helicopter spinning quickly, and your voice can increase as you're explaining those. So sometimes you can increase the pace of your voice to match the thing that you're talking about. So as I say, the main point is keep the voice slow, make sure the audience can follow, but you can mix it up. And that's just a way of keeping the speech entertaining and engaging and preventing your audience from switching off. One of the most underrated techniques is the use of the pause. Now, I think it's absolutely crucial to use a pause in any form of speech or presentation. So last week, I spoke about various ways that you can open a presentation, whether it's a rhetorical question, to bold statements, etc. And you would normally finish that with a quick pause at the end. So you might ask a rhetorical question, could be something like, think about how important computers are in our lives. Then you take a quick pause for a couple of seconds, let the message sink in with the audience, let them think about the question you've just asked. And they're on side with you. They're thinking about your point and thinking about where it is that you're going to go next. Or if you've made a bold statement, let that sink in for a few seconds. Let them think about the significance of that before you move on. The pause is absolutely crucial. Whereas if you, let's say you asked that same rhetorical question and straight away just carried on talking, didn't give the audience time to think, well, it hasn't had the time to really resonate with them and hasn't had the same impact. So a pause is absolutely vital there. Likewise, it's not just the beginning of a presentation. You can use this at any stage throughout the presentation itself, not just the beginning. Whenever you make a significant statement, whenever you use, say, a statistic to back up your point, and it's quite a significant statistic, pause, because it just shows the significance of that point that you've just made. I think the final stage that I would use a pause as well is if ever you get any form of reaction from an audience. So this would normally be if you're delivering a presentation itself. So you might get some sort of applause halfway through. There could be laughter. There could be a gasp from your audience. If you get any form of reaction, take a pause at that moment. Let the audience do what they're doing. Let them finish clapping. Let them finish laughing, whatever. Because if you carry on talking during that, they're not giving you their full attention and they're not taking in what you're talking about. So anytime you get a reaction from the audience, let them finish. The next point I'm going to look at is enunciation and pronunciation. So quite often people think that when it comes to public speaking and presentations, they need to speak with a certain voice. They need to put on, received pronunciation or a posh accent. And the reality is that isn't the case. Quite often you see this when it comes to court as well. So people think if they're doing mooting, mock trials, advocacy, or even in court itself, they need to speak with a certain voice. The answer is you don't. Accents are perfectly fine. If you have an accent, don't worry about it, because if you speak with your normal accent, it makes your speech sound a lot more genuine, and it's much easier for you to concentrate on the presentation. You've got a lot to think about when it comes to any form of presentation itself. And if you've got the worry of trying to put on some fake accent at the same time, it just adds another element of difficulty for you that you don't really need. So just carry on and talk with your normal accent. There's nothing wrong with it. It actually adds character to your speech. What you will do, though, coming back to what I mentioned before, is you'll be speaking slower anyway. So this is going to naturally change your voice. Even though you're speaking in the same accent, things will sound slightly slower and slightly clearer because of the pace at which you're speaking. And the other thing to think about is to pronunciate all of your words in full. So in normal language, normal speaking, we might drop the G at the end of a word. So everything might become everything. And there's lots of words that end in G's that we do that with. And there's many other words where we use shortened versions or colloquialisms. If you're using full words and pronouncing every letter and every syllable, naturally, this is going to slow your voice down, and it's going to help you help with the overall presentation itself. So the key point there is don't worry about an accent. Speak in your normal accent. Just focus on slowing down and pronouncing your words in full. The other thing that I see quite often when it comes to presentations, either general presentations or even advocacy in court proceedings or mock trial proceedings, is the use of complex language and complex sentence structure. So people think that when it comes to public speaking, we have to talk differently. We have to make ourselves sound cleverer than we otherwise would. And the answer is you don't need to. Quite often it's not necessary, because as I've mentioned earlier, when it comes to public speaking, presentations, advocacy, whatever it might be, you're trying to convey a point, you're trying to convince somebody of something, you're trying to communicate your message. And the idea is you want whatever your thoughts are to go into the minds of your audience. And the more difficult it is for your audience to take that in, the less likely they are to follow your message. So if you're using complex language and convoluted sentence structure, it's more difficult for the audience to follow. So normally simpler, shorter sentences are better when it comes to presentations. Firstly, it makes it significantly easier for you to deliver the presentation and also to learn the presentation. It reduces any risks of you tripping up because there's difficult words for you to try and pronounce, or you can't recall what you've been talking about. And lastly, you're less likely to confuse your audience. If you use words that they can't understand, because they don't understand the meaning of a certain word, or you've used a very weird sentence structure, well, you might as well have not been talking. So the point is, as a general rule, simpler is better, less is more. Now, of course, as with everything, this isn't a general rule. Sometimes you might be delivering a talk whereby you are, it could be an entertaining speech, it could be a speech at a wedding or whatever it might be, and you'll go to town there using more flowery language, so slightly different. Or it could be a sales pitch whereby you're using a lot of sort of fluff to sell the product. Fine, might use different sentence structure there, you might use a bit more flowery language. But as a general rule, for most sort of informative presentations, less is more, simpler is better. I'm going to finish tonight. Tonight's a slightly shorter session than previous sessions. And I'm going to finish tonight by looking at some common mistakes that occur in public speaking. And one of the most common mistakes that we see is the use of filler words. So quite often you'll watch a presentation and you'll see somebody throw in lots of ums, likes, I means, and it's quite distracting if you're an audience watching this. Now, of course, this is something that crops up in everyday conversation for most people. So one good way to try and eliminate this is to think consciously in your everyday talking about any of these common mistakes or these filler words that crop up. Try and look out for them and try and think consciously about them when they occur. You can even ask your family and friends to pull you up on it. So that way you'll be thinking about this even more consciously. And then naturally that will sort of spread into your public speaking and will come out of your presentations. And secondly, the more you prepare, the more you practice, and the more confident you feel in your material, the less likely you are to be throwing in these filler words, as it were. And the last point that I'm going to finish on, and I've mentioned this previously, but I think it's absolutely crucial, is that whenever it comes to public speaking and presentations, there's always going to be times when you trip up, you make mistakes, you forget your lines. It's always going to happen, or it will happen at some stage. When it does, the one thing, if you only take one thing away, remember this: do not panic. If it happens, it's fine. Take a breath. Look at any notes that you've got if you need to. Have a sip of water, regather your thoughts, and carry on. The last thing you want to do is start flapping, start apologizing, showing that you're in the danger zone. Just pause, take a breath, and go back. And that's possibly the best piece of advice I can give you when it comes to presentations. So it's a slightly shorter session than normal, but those are some of my key tips when it comes to the techniques for public speaking. I hope that you found that useful, and I hope that you've enjoyed the course.